Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christoph Husmann. I'm spokesman of the management board and CFO of Encavis AG, one of the larger operators and owners of solar and wind farms in 12 European countries. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we released our figures for Q1 2024 recently, and we had an ad hoc news on these on May 3rd because our figures are fairly below previous year's level. But this shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone because that was foreseen and already included into our guidance. And the reasons for that were outlined in our guidance release beginning of this year. I will guide you through that. But before we go into that, I would like to go into the highlights of Q1 2024. Well, as you know, there is a takeover process going on where KKR and Husmann, together with our already existing shareholder Abacon, is taking over Encavis with the intention to get 100% of the shares. We signed an investment agreement with KKR on March 14th, in which we line out the strategic goals which we together aim at in this partnership. And KKR launched the voluntary public takeover on April 2024. KKR and Husmann and Abacon are offering €17.50 cash consideration per share. This offer period ends on 29th of May. The management board and the supervisory board reflected that offer diligently and accepted it, and we commended all shareholders to accept the offer. We did that in our joint reason statement on May 2nd. But this progress is not only progressing, but in the meantime, we worked a lot on building up our business. So we started the construction of a 114 megawatt solar park in Borrentin, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, and we signed 2 non-recourse project financing agreements in a total amount of €203 million for our both Spanish parks Talayuela and La Cabrera. And we signed a PPA contract for the largest park which we manage, the 260 megawatt park in Bartow, Germany, but which is owned by a fund of Encavis Asset Management. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go into the details of our figures. Well, first of all, we can see here that the energy production of our existing portfolio dropped by 8% compared to previous year, which is 60 gigawatt lower energy production than last first quarter. 2/3 of that is due to the weather conditions, which are not really bad in this year, but which were much more favorable in Q1 2023. The other 1/3, so approximately 20 gigawatt hours, are due to the fact that end of last year we sold 2 wind farms, Geusen and Soland, which were at the end of their feed-in tariff and which were technically outdated, and so therefore repowering is necessary. And this could better be done by developers. So we sold them on a very favorable price, and so therefore this capacity of these parks are missing here. In total, the energy production dropped comparable to the last year by 12 gigawatt hours. So obviously we got 47 gigawatt hours of additional power production by new additions to our capacities. We acquired at the end of last year wind farms in Finland as well as in Germany, and they are running well. So the 2% negative deviation in energy production compared in Q1 2024 compared to Q1 2023 is reflected in our revenues with 12.2 million lower revenues. How does that work? That 2% lower gigawatt hour production is reflected in 12% lower revenues. Well, the 12.2 million euros less revenues compared to previous year are due to special effects which we had last year, which couldn't be repeated this year. Firstly, last year we got some delayed payment for the year 2022 for the so-called performance imbalance factor in the Netherlands. There we received 8.1 million euros, which was a one-off effect, which couldn't be repeated this year. And last year, due to the ongoing war in Ukraine, there was a higher price level all over Europe for power, and that led, since the power prices came down considerably, now it means a drop in revenues for us in the first quarter by 5.3 million euros. Both effects were known to us, and so they were incorporated in our plan. So therefore, the deviation to the plan is not meaningful. So we are full on track, although these figures do not look favorable, but that is due to one-off effects first quarter 2023. So the same deviation which we see in the revenues then is true for the EBITDA and EBIT as well. But since we got new parks connected to the grid, which contribute positively to the revenues as well, but they come along with additional cost, and so the gap in the revenues leads to additional lower EBITDA and EBIT. In total, we have in the first quarter a negative result. That is not surprising either, as I will show you on a later page. Well, let's look into the segments. Overall, we can see that we have a drop in revenues in the solar farms, in the wind farms, and in the asset management, not in the PV service. Here we have growth. Let's go into the details. In the solar farms, we have a 10 million euro drop of revenues. Again, this delayed remuneration in the Netherlands for the performance imbalance factor, that was in the solar business. So 80% of the drop of the 10 millions of revenues is due to that effect. And here we suffer 1.7 million euros on lower prices, and that is in fact then the explanation for the deviation. Since we have, and that is most important to understand later, the negative result in that quarter, since we have a fixed cost system where all these parks have fixed costs and virtually no variable cost, any deviation in the revenue 101 comes down to the EBITDA and to the EBIT. And here we see a 10 million euro gap in the revenues as well as in the EBITDA and in the EBIT. In the wind farms, we have a decline of revenues as well, which is 3 million euros. And here it is that 5 million euros lower revenues are due to our existing portfolio, where firstly we sold to the wind farms, Geusen and Soland, which do not produce anymore, which is 1.5 million euros. And we have, due to meteorological reasons, 3.6 million euros lower revenues here compared to previous first quarter, which was quite okay. And this was partially compensated by 2.6 million euros additional revenues for new farms, which were connected to the grid in Germany and Finland, which I already stated. In the PV services, we see a growth of our revenues, of the total revenues by 2.6 million and by the net revenues by 1.4 million. The difference between these two figures is the internal revenue, therefore not shown in our consolidated figures. So that means we have a growth in the internal revenues that services Stern performs in our own parks and for external customers as well. And in the same time, the margins are improving as well. This is a very positive development for our service business. The asset management itself had a not so strong start this first quarter, so some of the growth plans which they have are more projected for the Q3, so it means in the third quarter this year. but they are in line with our expectations. Well, let's come to the loss of the first quarter now of the total. As you'll see here, we compare here the revenues as well as the earnings after tax of the first quarter of many years with the full year results. And here you see that firstly, losses in the first quarter, these are the red boxes, are not unusual for our business. That happened last time in 2021, in 2018, and in 2016. Why is that the case? We are a solar company and do have some wind farms. 80% of our capacities are solar farms. As I pointed out already, they all have fixed cost. That means in every quarter, the cost of the respective parks are the same. But the irradiation of the sun in the winter quarters is very low. Since we start the year with the first quarter, which has low irradiation, the revenues in this quarter are low, but the costs are fixed and high. So therefore, losses are produced. But that is more than overcompensated in the second and third quarter and somewhat weakened in the fourth quarter. In some years, like in 2022 and 2023, this usual negative effect, which increases the more solar farms you have, that means the positive development of more solar farms, is reflected in higher losses in the first quarter, but they were overcompensated in some years. For instance, in 2022 and 2023, in the first quarters, by good weather and at the same time by unusual high power prices due to the war in Ukraine. But they were just overcompensated, and so the profits in the first quarter are unusual, so the losses should be standard. Again, overcompensate in the second and third quarter. And what you see here is that whether we have a loss in the first quarter or not, this always was then in the year that the revenues as well as the earnings after tax were record-breaking and increasing. So therefore, although we see that power prices are considerably lower than last year, and although we see that in the beginning of the year power prices decreased further, but in the last 2 weeks increased again, we know that 95% of the forecasted revenues we have for 2024 are price secured. We have it via feed-in tariffs or via PPA or hedging contracts. These prices are fixed. So therefore, the current development of lower power prices, as well as the development in the first quarter, meteorological-wise, does not irritate us, and therefore we are emphasizing our guidance. So we are aiming still at 460 million euros of revenues and more than 300 million euros of EBITDA. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your audience. Thank you very much for your interest in our company. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact our investor relations department at ir@encavis.com. Thank you very much.